Well, it turns out I ain't pregnant. I don't need an antidepressant. Tears ain't the only thing flowing. And by the way things are going, the moods will be swinging. I'll be mad as hell for no reason. I need 7 days to go a little crazy and be a big hot mess with PMS.
Hi all, we just wanted to welcome you guys to our one and only podcast, Frustration About Menstruation.
So today we're going to be talking about two different readings focused on sex-based inequalities. The first reading is called If Men Could Menstruate by Gloria Steinem, and the second is the UN's policy brief concerning the impacts of COVID-19 on women. To analyze these readings, we're going to share some personal stories, some relevant TikToks, and some interesting data from a survey that we recently sent out. The demographics of the survey were there was 75% people that identified as she, her, 24% of the respondents identified as he, him, and 1% of the respondents identified as they, them. The majority age range of the respondents was 18 to 22 years old, with one person being under 18 and two being 23 years and older. We didn't ask about race. However, our survey was sent out to multiple group chats, and the majority of the people who replied were students in North Carolina, but there were some respondents that were out of state.
Yep, that sounds good. Also, we're going to be using 3 different questions that we prepared as a framework to discuss these readings and to guide our conversations.
So first we wanted to know if you guys agreed with Steinem. With this question, we're interested in discussing everything to do with menstruation and what it would be like if men were the ones to menstruate. So I'm really interested in hearing your opinions.
Our second question asks how COVID-19's unique impact on women is related to sexism, oppression, and power. Here we will discuss the policy brief and personal experiences where we may or may not have seen the pandemic affect genders differently.
And our final question asks how the social world would be affected by reversed gender roles. This is definitely a loaded question with many different answers, so we are really excited to discuss it.
So let's just begin with a quick summary of the readings for this section. The Steinem article imagines an alternate universe where cis men, or people that were assigned a male at birth, menstruate. The policy brief explores how the pandemic affected women as well. So let's just start with Steinem's article. What did you guys think about it?
You know, after reading Steinem, I felt a little bit more insecure about having a period and being a woman in general. Although I'm not a male, I definitely feel as though they have their own things that they're embarrassed about and have to hide when they start puberty, such as like their voice cracking. So I think it's really interesting that Steinem is saying that periods wouldn't be seen as embarrassing if men were to have them. But I'm really interested in seeing what your take on it, JJ. What your take was on it, JJ, seeing as you're the only male in our group.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely interesting reading from a male's point of view. Reading the article, it's just, to me, it's so important to destigmatize and normalize periods because I have a lot of female friends in my life, and so the topic of menstruation has never been one of like hate or judgment or even really weirdness for me. But I do know growing up for a lot of people during puberty, bleeding can be a sign of embarrassment, especially with a lot of people having bad first times and being laughed at. And so changes to somebody's body should never be laughed at. And so as men, since we don't have to deal with those things during puberty, we need to do what we can to shut down the stigma around periods.
Yeah, that makes sense. Destigmatizing periods and embarrassment about them would be really great because, like, I know that I still feel like I have to hide my sanitary products when I go to the bathroom and stuff like that. Also, JJ, you said you have a lot of female friends, so periods aren't really an embarrassing topic for you, which is really awesome to hear because I feel like a lot of boys are so awkward talking about periods.
Yeah, that's very true. That's actually a good lead into the TikToks we collected.
damn it! I hate being a woman! I hate it! I just ruined my favorite goddamn pair of pants! For what? I know you're not pregnant! You don't gotta tell me every goddamn month! I know it! I know I ain't been getting dick! Alright, thanks for reminding me! But you don't gotta ruin my goddamn pants too! God damn.
You know, it's really cool that there are so many TikToks like that recently. I know they're supposed to be lighthearted and fun and kind of a joke, but it does bring the awareness that we have so many people who are uneducated about menstruation and sexual health.
Yeah, for sure. And this is probably a good time to bring in some of the stories that were given in our survey. We asked an open-ended question about interesting period stories, and here's one of the answers we received.
Yeah, so this girl asked her band director if she could use the bathroom, and her band director replied, "Why didn't you go before practice?" She replied, "I didn't have my period before practice." He said, "Well, you should have gone before and gotten it out of the way." She replied, "How was I supposed to know? It wasn't there." Then he said, "Well, you can hold it until the end of rehearsal." So the next week, 7 full days later, she asked to go again to the bathroom, and he said, "Didn't you have your period last week? You're just trying to get out of practice." He didn't believe that her period could possibly last 7 full days. Also, her band directors made them say the word muskrat as code for "I have to go to the bathroom for my period," because 2 grown men with wives and daughters were too ashamed to hear or say the word period. They told them this in front of the entire band, with boys and other people without periods included, and it made all the people with periods feel super ashamed and embarrassed, like there was something wrong with us that we had to keep secret from everyone else to not gross them out. Those were probably the moments where she felt most ashamed to be female.
You know, Sarah, that is a crazy story, and sadly, stories like that are so common. I know we don't have time to read all the responses we got to that question, but there were tons like this where girls felt embarrassed about their periods.
Our survey did give us a good general idea of college students' views on periods and gender and about the pandemic in general. As you can see in the graph, there's a very neutral thought about how COVID-19 has affected gender. You all read the policy brief about how women are more at a disadvantage. Interestingly enough, our responses seem to be split half-half based on gender. So lots of people mentioned how men are more reckless and unlikely to wear masks, and that's why they think they're disproportionately affected. And some people even mentioned that they were going to have physical labor jobs and they couldn't work from home.
Yeah, that's right. One of our survey takers also mentioned that a friend's job hired all the males back first when the business finally started to reopen.
Yeah, also many women are at a disadvantage because when everyone started to work from home, many times it was the mothers that were the ones who took on the primary caregiver role. Even now, with the economy reopening, mothers are still expected to stay home if their kids have online school while the dads return to work.
Yeah, I think it was interesting how a lot of people in the survey said that they were neutral about COVID-19 disproportionately affecting gender, like this graph shows. But once they took the time to think about the short answer question that we asked for examples of gender disparities related to the pandemic, there was actually a lot of really good specific and personal examples of gender disparities related to the pandemic.
Yeah, another example we had for females being heavily disproportionately affected was about how a lot of females are teachers and they can't go back to work because of in-person teaching is hard, and also nurses whose home life and hours have become very different since the pandemic started.
Yeah, for sure. When I talked to my cousin who's a registered nurse from the Washington, D.C. area about her work periods and the impact COVID had on her personal and professional life, she mentioned that a lot of her colleagues are females, which makes it a lot easier to discuss things such as menstruation and puberty. But since a lot of her work is in NICUs or neonatal intensive care units, she deals mostly with the after effects of birth and dealing with the children. Um, so looking at females being disproportionately affected, this is especially true when we look towards our educational system, where 77% of the population of public schools teachers are females. Having women on the new front lines of this pandemic in schools and hospitals have unintended consequences when many of these females are mothers who go home to cook, clean, and watch their own children and family. Especially, this is especially true for dual income households as well. So, and the last bit of that conversation, I asked her thoughts on if men had periods, if she thought there'd be a better distribution and of women health products and health knowledge. And she took a couple of seconds and said there'd definitely be more legislation around it, but since we live in such a consumer-based society, it might be hard to get free sanitary products to everyone. I think it's time for a new topic.
So what I found interesting is that for the question that asked if women were viewed as the breadwinner, would there be female privilege? So over 50% agreed, leaving 25% neutral and 25% disagreeing.
It's crazy how Steinem said a biological gender reverse would keep the gender norms of power intact, because she said if men were the ones to menstruate, that they would still be glorified. But when we gender reverse the societal position, like we did with this breadwinner question, the power seemed to move with it. What do you guys think? Like, why wouldn't power move with a biological switch?
So I think society deems what is acceptable and therefore what holds the power. So society is deeming men as more powerful. Whatever men do, whether that's menstruating or not, it's going to be hyped up. This can even be seen with the staying home rule with COVID. Both males and females are staying home, but the moms are the ones taking on the caring role.
Right. So ethically, how does this power role fit into who decides what's right medically?
I think that falls under ethical relativism, where the attitudes of one culture or group determines what's right or wrong for another.
Ethical relativism is not a good way to look at this, though, and the way our health it should be best accounted for. It's great evidence for the objection to ethical relativism because men are determining what is more within this culture and what is more within health.
So I know this wasn't in the readings, but one of the many healthcare debates that gets brought up is what insurance covers and pink tax. So pink tax is derived from the fact that many feminine products are advertised with pink labels and are taxed as luxury items, making them more expensive. So we asked if sanitary products should be free or low cost, to which the majority strongly agreed. Even with that, we had lovely comments about how the first time someone had to buy a box of tampons on their own, they were shocked at the tax on it. Not to mention the lack of birth control due to side effects.
Yeah, but a lot of those are like the same side effects that females go through.
A lot of responsibility with birth control and situations like this are put on the female in the relationship. Sometimes I feel like I need to hide the fact that I'm on birth control, and I feel like the majority of people who take the pill or are on some form of birth control have to find a medical excuse for it. Culture is telling women that they need to be pure, yet they're the ones who have to make sure that they're taking the proper care of themselves.
Yeah, I think we also need to mention that Viagra is federally funded. We know insurance can cover birth control, but birth control can also be used for medical issues like irregular periods, hormone-related migraines, and acne, whereas Viagra is something used solely for pleasure.
It seems as though women are seen as irrational for their pain or emotions here. Just reading about this girl's story where she was in pain for hours over the toilet and showed up to work late after clearing it with her boss. When she finally could come into work, still pale from pain, and told her boss, he said that her period wasn't a good enough excuse and that it shouldn't happen again. I can't speak to your all's pain about period pains, but I heard that it can be the equivalency to being kicked in the balls.
This machine simulates what it's like to get kicked in the balls. My sister and her friend thought they could handle it, and this is what happened. 3, 2, 1, go. This machine tried a period cramp simulator. It all started when my sister told me periods were worse than getting kicked in the balls. So I tried a period cramp simulator to see just how bad it really was. Holy shit, I tried a period.
So I definitely think that both of those things hurt, but you can't really compare apples and oranges. Like being kicked in the balls also isn't a natural process and it doesn't last as long. Periods can last 3 to 7 days with many different symptoms that are more than just cramps. So there's definitely more to take into account, like headaches, acne, back pain, boob pain, and mood swings, and all those definitely suck.
You know, I really love this experience that we got from a trans woman. She heard about periods and everything from her trans boyfriend, but when she actually experienced it, she mentioned her unique relationship. She said the hormones are real. My mood changes from snappy, which she related to her PMS, to depressed when she's on her period, to sexually excited, which she assumed was when she was ovulating, to just average on a roughly weekly basis. Before learning this, I knew that menstruating women got moody sometimes, but that was the extent of her knowledge.
So I have decent amount of personal experience with men and periods. I grew up with 2 brothers, so menstruation was not a topic that was lightly discussed in my family. In fact, I often felt really ashamed and embarrassed about having to say anything related to me having my period. My brothers always made it very clear that it made them uncomfortable and would always be like, oh, like, why are you in such a bad mood? Is it that time of the month? They never really cared, of course. And my dad was always very uncomfortable when I ever brought up anything related to needing tampons or my stomach hurting from my period. So going off of my personal experience with discussing menstruation within my family, in our survey, we asked how often growing up did your family discuss menstruation and sexual health? And 40% answered 2 on a scale of 5, and even more interesting, only 3%, or 3 people, which is about 2%, rated this question a 5. So very few people are brought up in an environment where open discussions about menstruation occur. And it just adds to the stigma that we are already facing. Menstruation needs to be more normalized. It's a natural thing that every woman experiences, and there should be no shame around it.
You know what? That's right. I agree that it needs to be normalized. Anatomy is something that must be discussed better in primary school. Our survey definitely had some variety throughout the states, but I feel like the majority of our takers were from the state of North Carolina. And it really just shows that the reproductive education is lacking. But here are some more interesting takes we received from our open-ended questions about periods on our survey.
So one person said, it took me a whole year to actually tell my mom I had my period, and it was only because my sister ran out of pads, so I couldn't steal hers anymore. And I didn't even work/have a car, so I had to ask my mom.
This just really goes to show the stigma that surrounds menstruation. It really shouldn't be a shameful thing that a daughter should feel to have to hide her period from her mother, who's also another female who experiences menstruation. And like, I know I hid my first period from my mom. I did everything I could to hide it. And I really hope that if I have a daughter soon, that she doesn't feel like she needs to do that.
Yeah, destigmatizing is really important. Another interesting account from our survey said, my experiences with shame and hiding menstruation are different from cis women's because I'm trans. So hiding menstruation is directly related to my physical safety. And I thought that was an interesting perspective.
I also thought it was really interesting about the comment about this girl whose sister had to hide her period from her dad, and that was about 5 years ago, and she's still not sure if her sister ever told her dad that she received it.
Why is this something that men are so disgusted by? You can pull up a video game that has blood and gore and they won't be affected by that, but for some reason, women and their periods is such a shameful topic.
So to wrap up our discussion, I think we just want to reiterate our 3 main questions, and we welcome you to post your all's answers in the comment section.
Yeah, so the first question was just if Steinem was correct in her assertions. The second was about the impact of COVID on women and if it was related to sexism, oppression, and power. And then the last question, we were looking at how the social world and healthcare would be altered if gender roles were reversed.
So we just wanted to thank you all for tuning in and listening to our podcast, Frustration About Menstruation.
Well, it turns out I ain't pregnant. I don't need an antidepressant. Tears ain't the only thing flowing. And by the way things are going, the moods will be swinging. I'll be mad as as hell for no reason. I need 7 days to go a little crazy and be a big hot mess with PMS.
Bye.
Bye.
Ew.